During the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which lasted 6 weeks, 137 American soldiers lost their lives. However, following this initial victory, more than 4,000 additional American soldiers were killed. How did this happen? Wars do not end merely with the country's military defeat or the death of its leader. War serves as a means to achieve political objectives. Failure to meet these objectives or unforeseen consequences can sometimes turn a military victory into a major disaster. The line between victory and defeat becomes increasingly blurred. The March-April 2003 operation to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime achieved its operational goals surprisingly faster than external observers had anticipated. However, despite this victory, key factors such as the inability of the United States and its allies to stabilize the country, reconstruct the destroyed state, and establish a foundation for a sustainable political order led to an equally surprising negative impact due to the inability to consolidate the gains. In the first year of the war, what was already a challenging post-regime change stabilization operation became an even more difficult counter-insurgency operation. Over the next 3 years, the conflict transformed into an ethnic and sectarian civil war among various power groups in Iraq, fighting for control and survival. The Iraq War has had profound and lasting geostrategic impacts. Today, Iran is seen as the only victor in the region, having gained strength and confidence. Iraq has lost its role as a regional counterbalance and has been filled with elements serving Iran's interests. With Iraq no longer a threat, Iran's destabilizing influence has rapidly spread to Yemen, Bahrain, Lebanon, and Syria. Bashar al-Assad misjudged his ability to control foreign Salafi fighters and found himself threatened by the forces he had used to resist the American invasion. Syria has become one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century, leading to over 500,000 deaths, the reuse of chemical weapons, and the largest refugee crisis since World War II. The power vacuum in the region triggered the establishment of ISIS and led to the beginning of a wave of terrorism that creates a global threat. The US military's cooperation with Kurdish forces in the region has angered Turkey, a long-standing NATO ally since the Korean War, causing deep tensions between the US and Turkey. The threat of a regional Sunni-Shiite conflict has become a potential global instability issue. The human and material costs of the conflict are staggering. Approximately 4,500 American soldiers died, and 32,000 were wounded. Over 300 soldiers from other coalition countries also died. Casualty estimates in Iraq range between 200,000 and 1 million people. And these human casualties occurred not during the war, but in the confusion of the post-war period of instability. The costs for the US, including the care for the wounded and debt interest, are difficult to fully calculate. However, the war's cost is undoubtedly high, with low estimates ranging from $800 billion to $3 trillion. Although the Iraq War was operationally successful, it was strategically a failure. This video will explore what the US aimed to achieve in the Iraq War, what was accomplished, and why the goals were not met. The video preparation involved various reports from the US military and secondary sources, such as General George Casey's book, Strategic Reflections. This is a history of an unfinished war. The video will focus on the military process rather than the political background of the events. Following Operation Desert Storm in early 1991, American and Iraqi commanders met near the Iraq-Kuwait border and initiated ceasefire talks on March 3, 1991. While Iraqi forces had been expelled from Kuwait, Saddam Hussein's regime continued in Iraq. President George H.W. Bush and coalition leaders, having achieved their primary goals of restoring Kuwaiti sovereignty and territorial integrity, decided against advancing their troops to Baghdad. From 1991 until their renewed confrontation in 2003, both American and Iraqi forces underwent various changes and transformations. During the 1990s, while the US military was engaged in contingency operations in Haiti, Somalia, and Bosnia, the Iraqi regime dealt with internal conflicts. The US learned significant lessons from Operation Desert Storm. In the 1990s, US military leaders opted for an evolutionary modernization of their forces, driven primarily by the evolving nature of conflicts. The unconventional nature of conflicts in Somalia, Mali, Haiti, and the Balkans, where traditional military strategies were not applied, played a significant role in these discussions. The advanced technology demonstrated during Desert Storm was believed to provide a decisive advantage to the US military. Developments in precision-guided munitions and sensor technologies were expected to eliminate battlefield uncertainties and create a broad operational space. Thus, it was anticipated that future battles would involve smaller units using advanced technology to deliver swift and decisive results against the enemy. The end of the Cold War led to a reduction in the size of the military, accompanied by an increased focus on technology. One of the key lessons from Desert Storm was the need for faster deployment of troops to conflict zones and the development of measures to provide additional logistical support. To enhance operational capacity and reaction speed in the Gulf region, additional equipment and units were deployed to Qatar and Kuwait. A new military concept emerged: operations other than wars, referring to low-intensity conflicts short of war. According to a report I read, this concept originated with Operation Provide Comfort, conducted to provide humanitarian aid to Kurds fleeing the Saddam regime. This type of operation, which started in 1991, continued through the 1990s in Somalia, the Balkans, and Haiti, providing various experiences for the US military. The idea that this concept could be actively used in the battlefield increasingly took shape in American command. In 2001, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld emphasized that the US should not focus on large-scale peacekeeping operations from the 1990s. He also advocated for enhancing missile defense capabilities and using technology to make smaller forces more lethal, fast, and easily deployable, focusing on weapon systems and equipment rather than people. While the US military debated its structure, organization, technology, and future warfare methods due to its contingency operations globally, Saddam chose to develop measures against both the chaos and insurgency in Iraq and the Iranian regime, rather than preparing against the US military he knew he could not defeat. On February 15, 1991, President George H.W. Bush called on the Iraqi people and soldiers to rise against Saddam's regime. Following the initiation of ceasefire talks on March 3, 1991, an intifada began against the regime, with Shiite groups dominating the south and Kurdish forces seizing major cities in the north. Thus, a period of internal turmoil began in Iraq after the ceasefire. During this time, over 1 million Kurds were gathered near Turkey's border. As Turkey opened its borders, this population gradually acquired Turkish citizenship. The decision not to involve US troops in these events allowed Saddam to consolidate his power and crush dissent, leading to growing animosity among Iraq's Shiite population towards the US, which persisted and emerged against the US after 2003. While internal unrest continued intermittently, in 1993, Saddam decided to Islamicize his regime through a national faith campaign to gain religious legitimacy and strengthen his power. Once secular, Saddam began building mosques, supporting religious leaders, adding Allahu Akbar to the Iraqi flag, and promoting propaganda about the Christian founder of the Arab nationalist Ba'ath Party, Michel Aflaq, converting to Islam on his deathbed. He also encouraged Islamic scholars to study the life of Prophet Muhammad. His primary goal was to strengthen Islamic groups and tribes in Iraq to align with and support his regime. During this Islamization period, Saddam aligned himself with Salafists, whom he saw as a lesser threat, while viewing the Muslim Brotherhood as a greater threat. In December 1995, high-ranking Iraqi military leaders, including General Rod Hamdani, met with Saddam to propose new doctrines and organizational structures based on lessons learned from the 1991 war. Observing that the US military could destroy any large military force with its technological advantages, Hamdani suggested avoiding the creation of large military units and armored forces. Instead, he proposed implementing guerrilla resistance, creating light infantry units to disrupt and challenge occupying forces. However, Saddam rejected this advice, and the Iraqi military continued to be organized with pre-1991 structures and equipment, a decision that would soon prove to be a grave mistake. It is important to note that as US troops withdrew from Mogadishu, Saddam interpreted the outcome of US operations in Somalia as a sign that America could not endure military casualties and would want to immediately withdraw from a bloody conflict. This belief became a key element of Saddam's strategic thinking. Reflecting this, Saddam distributed copies of Mark Bowden's book, Black Hawk Down, to his commanders during the US attack on Iraq in 2003. The US administration wanted to use Kurdish groups in northern Iraq as support forces in military operations against Saddam. They had even called for an uprising against Saddam. Operation Provide Comfort aimed to limit the Iraqi regime's military operations against the groups that responded to this call. Following the NATO operations and the end of the conflict between Kurdish Peshmerga forces and Iraqi troops in October 1991, an autonomous Kurdish region was established outside of Baghdad's control. In 1996, while the US deployed some of its forces to intervene in Bosnia, Saddam's regime began to reassert pressure in the autonomous regions in northern Iraq. In August 1996, a surprising event occurred. The Kurdish parties, which the US had helped establish autonomous mini-states in northern Iraq, unexpectedly sought support from Saddam over a dispute regarding the sharing of smuggled oil revenues and demanded that the Iraqi army cross the previously established Green Line. As a result, a civil war erupted between the Kurdish factions led by Iran-supported Jalal Talabani and Saddam-supported Masoud Barzani. Saddam and Barzani joined forces to push Talabani to the Iranian border. To halt this ongoing operation, the US launched Operation Desert Strike in September 1996, targeting Iraq. This led to Iraqi forces retreating behind the Green Line. In October 1998, the US Congress passed the Iraq Liberation Act, which allocated $97 million to Iraqi opposition groups. Just weeks after the law came into effect, Saddam's regime announced that it would cease all cooperation with UN weapons inspectors and required inspection teams to leave Iraq by December 15, 1998. In response, US and British forces launched Operation Desert Fox within hours. Operation Desert Fox involved aerial bombing of Iraq's military targets. It shifted US policy from containing the current situation to regime change, a change announced by President Clinton on December 18, 1998. Since 1991, sanctions had crippled Iraq's ability to sustain even its oil sector, which was crucial for state revenue. A country that had appeared rich and modern at the end of the 1970s had deteriorated into poverty by the late 1990s. Iraq faced collapse in crucial areas such as social and political conditions, economy, technology, demographics, and education. With the legal economy nearly destroyed, many Iraqis, including government officials, turned to black market trade with neighboring countries. This situation also applied to Syria, which benefited from smuggling Iraqi oil and other goods to generate illegal revenue. In February 1999, a shocking event shook the entire Iraqi society. Shiite leader Ayatollah Muhammad al-Sadr was one of the most prominent religious leaders in Iraq. During a Friday prayer in February 1999, he appeared at the pulpit wrapped in a white shroud. He began by saying, "I know that this act will cost me my life, but it will bring me to the rank of martyr," and called for the release of Shiites being tortured in Saddam's prisons. Saddam Hussein responded to the Ayatollah exactly 1 week later, as expected. Ayatollah Muhammad al-Sadr was gunned down in his car while returning home from leading the Friday prayers. Along with him, his 2 sons, who were the brothers of Muqtada al-Sadr, also died. The assassination sparked outrage not only in Iraq but among Shiite communities worldwide. Shiites in Najaf took to the streets, and as protests began to escalate, Saddam Hussein ordered that the Ayatollah's body be buried without ceremony and secretly. Despite threats from Baghdad, thousands of Shiites attended the Ayatollah's funeral, and the Revolutionary Guards fired machine guns at the crowd. The area in front of the shrine of Hazrat Ali turned into a slaughterhouse, but the death toll was never known. Saddam's regime went further by secretly trying and executing 4 prominent Shiite intellectuals on charges of assassinating the Ayatollah. The country became increasingly divided along ethnic and sectarian lines. By the late 1990s, Iraq had become far more impoverished and devastated than it appeared from the outside, nearing state collapse. After the 9/11 attacks, the George W. Bush administration launched a war on terrorism campaign targeting major terrorist groups and the states supporting them. Following operations in Afghanistan, attention shifted to Iraq, and plans to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime were discussed. CENTCOM was tasked with preparing contingency plans to invade Iraq and dismantle the Saddam regime. On December 28, 2001, a four-phase plan for the invasion of Iraq was approved. Phase 1. Forming a coalition and securing international support before the operation. Phase 2. Conducting psychological and military attrition operations to break the will of the Iraqi people and military. Phase 3. Executing military operations to defeat the Iraqi army and overthrow the regime. Phase 4. Transitioning to a new Iraqi government and conducting stability operations. In the military operations conducted between March and April 2003 for the invasion, coalition forces suffered 172 deaths and 600 injuries, while Iraqi army casualties were around 5,000. Although operations concluded, both sides continued to suffer casualties from sporadic clashes until the end of 2003. During this period, coalition forces lost 408 soldiers and had 200 injured, while detaining 10,000 suspects and killing 600 insurgents. After the fall of Saddam's regime, the power vacuum led to the country being occupied by Sunni resistance groups, Shia militias, the Iranian regime, and various Kurdish groups. Over time, this led to a situation where the initiative shifted from coalition military forces to various insurgent groups in Iraq. During the Cold War, the results of decisive battles were crucial, but now the importance shifted to ongoing urban warfare and stability and peacekeeping operations. The U.S. military's focus on defeating the Iraqi army and reluctance to engage in stability operations led to significant issues. Plans underestimated Saddam Hussein's extensive paramilitary structure, tribal dominance, and other dynamics in Iraq, all of which played critical roles in the instability and insurgency that followed the invasion. Similarly, military intelligence efforts were primarily focused on the Iraqi Republican Guard but neglected paramilitary forces. Instead of gathering information on complex social dynamics like communities and tribes, efforts were focused solely on the military capabilities of the Iraqi army. Iraq's unique political situation and demographic structure were not sufficiently considered. After the invasion, CENTCOM had assumptions that the remaining Iraqi army would assist in security and stability efforts. It became evident over time that these assumptions were unrealistic. Due to these factors, the invasion of Iraq was considered an operational success but a strategic failure. The ultimate goal of regime change happened quickly, leading to the collapse of the Iraqi state structure. There was no environment of law and order. Without any authority to restore order or manage the country, many Iraqis looted public infrastructure and carried out revenge attacks against former Ba'ath regime supporters. Similarly, Iraqis expecting the U.S. to quickly restore order and improve living standards were also disappointed. As the foundations of the Iraqi state collapsed, many Iraqis turned to their previously dormant sectarian, tribal, or ethnic identities in their struggle for survival. Most importantly, the events of 2003 demonstrated that the U.S.-led coalition's invasion of Iraq and the ensuing collapse of the Iraqi state and power vacuum were the key factors initiating a civil war among various groups in Iraq. The coalition forces' focus on operations against these groups exacerbated issues with ensuring public security and establishing authority. Additionally, the U.S. decision in late 2003 to rapidly transition to self-governance and expedite elections for political stability had the opposite effect, increasing violence among power contenders, fueling divisions, and creating a chaotic political process amid internal and regional conflict. During this period, both Iraqis and coalition forces found themselves in a bloody sectarian civil war. By 2004, coalition leaders harbored unrealistic hopes of soon achieving stability in Iraq and transferring the mission to a multinational actor like the UN or NATO. This created an obstacle to the development of long-term and comprehensive plans and strategies. On the contrary, forces opposing the coalition in Iraq began developing and implementing long-term plans. Iran aimed to establish a foothold in Shia-majority regions and advance its activities accordingly. Zarqawi sought to initiate a broader Sunni uprising, planning to incite a civil war and seize power, continuing to coordinate his actions. By the first anniversary of the invasion, Iraq had become a powder keg. April 2004 emerged as the worst month in terms of American losses, with a total of 137 soldiers killed. This number was only one less than the total casualties during the 6-week Iraq invasion in 2003. Several factors contributed to this, but one interesting detail caught my attention. The U.S. military personnel who have completed their tour of duty have returned home. However, incoming personnel were subjected to joint orientation training in institutions such as the Joint Readiness Training Center before being assigned to their original duty stations. This led to serious shortcomings in the field until the training was completed. I wanted to highlight this detail as an example of how even a simple planning error can lead to serious problems on the battlefield. In any case, April 2004 was recorded as a significant turning point that changed the course and character of the conflict in the Iraq War. It legitimized the insurgent struggle and created a perception that the coalition could be defeated, thereby expanding and strengthening the insurgency. According to General George Casey, appointed as the commander of multinational force Iraq on July 1, 2004, the U.S. had to continually use its forces to address issues that the host nation itself should resolve for its own people. This situation forced U.S. forces into a constant state of crisis. He took action to address this by aiming to create a security environment in Iraq, conducive to elections through the organization, training, and equipping of local Iraqi security forces. This period was marked by a morale crisis among the coalition forces led by the U.S., due to the losses during the April insurgencies and the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. Key focuses during this period included holding elections in 2005 according to the UN's planned timeline and efforts to establish Iraqi security forces in Iraq. Americans were beginning to grow weary of the situation in Iraq. However, things never go as planned, do they? During the preparatory phase from August 2004 to December 2004, plans were revised to ensure the elections could be held in a secure environment in 7 major Iraqi cities. The goal was to effectively address armed groups. Special attention was given to operations in Fallujah, where the insurgency had reignited. However, just 48 hours after starting the Fallujah operation, Sunni insurgent groups led by Zarqawi attacked and captured Mosul. During the conflicts, it became clear that the reconstituted local Iraqi security forces were inadequate and incapable in facing the events. Additionally, when previously established reserve units were taken from one area and sent to intervene in another, security gaps were created in the abandoned area. For instance, sending a reserve unit from Baghdad to intervene in Fallujah compromised Baghdad's security. All these events revealed that coalition forces were in a weakened position in every region while trying to avoid fragmentation, and that the reserve unit was insufficient. As a result, the operations conducted in Najaf, Samarra, and Fallujah in the fall of 2004 managed to clear the region of Shia and Sunni militants threatening the critical elections in January 2005, albeit with difficulty. By December 2004, the coalition leaders' hope for holding the elections had become tangible. At the beginning of 2005, this period marked a phase where both Shia and Sunni insurgent groups, along with coalition forces, applied the lessons learned from ongoing conflicts. Despite the events in Mosul, the elections were conducted in a relatively secure environment due to the successful operations of coalition forces. The annual rotation of troops posed significant challenges in the struggle. This issue, combined with insufficient knowledge of the operational area, personnel shortages, and changing operational environments and threats, led to difficulties for the troops in the field. To overcome these challenges and respond to changes on the ground, the structure of the units was reorganized. In Iraq, where insurgency operations demanded intensive personnel, these shortages became apparent, leading even strategic reserves to be deployed to the operational area. Meanwhile, Sunni Arab leaders realized that boycotting the elections was a strategic mistake, inadvertently leaving the country's governance to the Shia. The election results, in addition to the security concerns in the conflict environment, intensified the political struggle within the country. Between April and August 2005, Special Forces units were deployed to control the western border, based on intelligence that the Syrian government was providing safe havens for armed groups active in Iraq. particularly Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The shift in focus to the West resulted in a lack of comprehensive efforts to combat the spreading sectarian violence in central Iraq and the potential threat of civil war. Baghdad, in particular, was subjected to numerous car bomb attacks. In this environment, sectarian groups in central Iraq began to target rival sects, leading to increased intersectarian violence. Executions during these conflicts did not spare the elderly, women, or children. The violence in central Iraq intensified on its own, leading to a cycle of violence that perpetuated itself and sparked even larger violent acts. General Casey acknowledged that the U.S. military in the past lacked the organizational structure and understanding to deal with the insurgency in Iraq. According to Casey, the U.S. military in 2003 was not prepared for an insurgency like the one in Iraq, and therefore, the military sought to improve by learning from this operation. During this period, a counterinsurgency operations research team was established to determine the best approaches to counterinsurgency. The team's research yielded the following conclusions. In general, the lack of reserves at almost every level caused units to hesitate in taking new initiatives or attacking. There were not enough troops to hold on to areas cleared of insurgents, resulting in insurgents returning to attack the same areas, forcing the advancing units to return and deal with them again. Due to the situation described in the second point, personnel developed a perception that there is a risk everywhere. Units were spread too thinly, with cases where, for example, a single battalion was responsible for holding a 2,000 square kilometers area with a population of approximately 430,000 people. The responsibility areas of units were created without considering the local population's cultural, political, tribal structure, and traditions. Comprehensive operations should not be undertaken until the Iraqi security forces reached sufficient levels of capability. Management and economic activities were as important as military operations and should be given equal importance. Transition teams were established to develop the Iraqi security forces. However, these teams faced difficulties due to the nature of Iraq's military culture. Corruption, a persistent issue from the past, was described as one of the fundamental problems within the Iraqi military, almost like a contagious disease. Key challenges included the presence of ghost soldiers, who were paid but did not actually exist, soldiers being allowed to go home for 1 week each month, and deep-rooted sectarian divisions within the military. On the other hand, it is important to note that while a soldier in the restructured Iraqi army earned $300 per month, an Iraqi planting explosives on the road could earn the same amount in one night. The problem was not in tactics, but in strategy. In November 2005, a U.S. strategy document titled National Strategy for Victory in Iraq was released. This document identified the enemy as Sunni Arabs, former regime loyalists, and individuals or groups associated with Al-Qaeda. The problems caused by Shia groups were not listed among the coalition's main concerns, as they were seen as issues that Iraq's own security forces could handle. The National Strategy for Victory in Iraq discussed 3 interrelated dimensions: economic, political, and security. Political dimension. This includes the phases of isolate, engage, and build. The enemy will be isolated, potential partners will be engaged and stable, pluralistic, and effective institutions and organizations will be built. Security dimension. This includes the phases of clear, hold, and build. Territories held by the enemy will be cleared and held, and the capabilities of the Iraqi security forces and local institutions will be developed. Economic dimension. This includes the phases of restore, reform, and build. Iraq's infrastructure will be restored, reforms will be implemented to achieve a sustainable economy, and Iraq's infrastructure will be protected. Its reintegration into the international economic community will be ensured, and all Iraqis will benefit. By early 2006, General Casey and MNFI leaders believed that their plan was largely on track. In their view, violence had decreased, election participation had increased, the Iraqi security forces had grown in number and capacity, and the Sunni insurgency was beginning to be broken. As a result, Casey and his commanders decided to continue and even accelerate the withdrawal of coalition forces from Iraq. strengthen the existing coalition forces, and hand over responsibility to the Iraqis. However, these predictions proved to be wrong. The MNFI, which had failed to foresee the insurgencies following the 2003 invasion, similarly failed to recognize that the insurgency was evolving into a civil war in 2006. In reality, the violent acts were no longer a reaction to the coalition's occupation. The violent power struggle among ethnic sectarian groups in Iraq had been ignited by the reaction to the Jafari government established at least a year earlier, and it had actually begun with the fall of Saddam's regime and continued to escalate until that point. The sectarian violence in the summer of 2006, and this period led to fundamental changes in the coalition's strategic plan and redirected the Iraq operation in a new direction. From this period onwards, the conflicts in Iraq began to be referred to as a civil war. In the summer of 2006, Baghdad found itself in a severe spiral of terror. In July alone, 3,400 civilian deaths occurred across Iraq, with 1,962 of them taking place in Baghdad. Iran's influence in both Baghdad and other regions of the country significantly increased. As violence and internal turmoil escalated in the country, U.S. forces were making plans to begin their withdrawal as soon as possible and leave security entirely in the hands of the Iraqi forces. The plans of General Casey and General Abizaid in the summer and fall of 2006 to reduce U.S. forces and subsequently withdraw from Iraq failed, and instead of withdrawing, it became necessary to increase the forces. Ultimately, the disparity between the coalition's plans and the realities on the ground led the U.S. president to lose confidence in the coalition's strategy that had been pursued for 2 years. Furthermore, coalition forces continued to suffer losses. For example, in Ramadi, coalition forces killed nearly 1,500 insurgents and arrested as many during 7 months of fighting. Coalition forces lost 96 troops, while the Iraqi soldiers and police they cooperated with lost 150. It should also be noted that the Iraqi police were in poor condition. Instead of maintaining security, many had become part of various armed groups or misused their police authority against other ethnic or religious groups. It is claimed that the Iraqi security forces did not trust each other, and even the Prime Minister did not trust the armed forces or police, relying on trusted teams for their security and operations. With these groups engaging in illegal activities, the mutual distrust escalated when it was revealed that even Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki was involved in planning attacks against Sunnis. In late 2006, President George W. Bush started to lose confidence in General Casey's strategies. As a result, General Casey was replaced by General David Petraeus, and a new strategy was developed, albeit with a focus primarily on military concerns, neglecting other significant issues. Despite some progress in security matters, sectarian conflicts remained unresolved, and crises with Prime Minister Maliki persisted. This situation led to the involvement of the Joint Strategic Assessment Team, JSAT, composed of elite officers, diplomats, and academics. The JSAT deviated from traditional operational planning processes by adopting an unusually comprehensive interagency and multinational approach. JSAT emphasized that securing the population would pave the way for political reconciliation in Iraq, weakening support for both al-Qaeda in Iraq and Shia militias. They identified a lack of political will and chronic state capacity as major obstacles to stabilizing the country, suggesting that simply pressuring Iraqis to take responsibility would not suffice. Their plan stood out due to its dual focus on public security and the political dimensions of the operation. The JSAT leaders concluded that Iraq was in the midst of a sectarian civil war, with the Iraqi government exacerbating the conflict. They criticized the coalition for working uncritically and unconditionally with the new, sectarian Iraqi government. The only viable solution, they argued, was to hold government leaders accountable for the actions of sectarian militias and, if necessary, use U.S. military power to force political moderates to eliminate extremists. As part of the new surge strategy, 5 additional U.S. brigades were deployed to Iraq between January and May 2007, bringing the total number of combat brigades to 20. 2 Marine battalions and a regiment-sized unit were also deployed, along with 5 Iraqi Army brigades, increasing the number of soldiers in Baghdad to 93,000. By mid-April 2007, Petraeus and Odierno had established over 20 US-Iraqi joint security stations in Baghdad's neighborhoods, a number that grew to 77 by the end of the surge. However, this new approach came at a cost, with US casualties rising as forces moved deeper into the city, resulting in 162 deaths and 1,140 injuries in February and March alone. In response to the coalition's operations, Al-Qaeda in Iraq launched some of the deadliest car bomb attacks targeting Shia civilians, while Shia militants intermittently bombed the Green Zone as a reaction to the arrival of new US troops. To secure Baghdad's perimeter, coalition forces prepared for Operation Phantom Thunder. The main objective of this operation was to retake the city of Bakuba from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The region had been plagued by sectarian violence since the early months of the war, earning the moniker Little Iraq due to its mix of Sunni and Shia tribes and Kurdish tensions. Bakuba had been declared the capital of the Caliphate by al-Zarqawi in 2006, shortly before he was killed nearby. The struggle for control of Bakuba in the spring and summer of 2007 became one of the most intense battles of the war. The coalition's efforts during the 60-day operation cleared many areas of Al-Qaeda and led to the killing of more than 1,000 Al-Qaeda militants. However, 150 US soldiers were lost. Following Operation Phantom Thunder, the security situation in Baghdad and its surroundings improved significantly. The weekly average of civilian deaths in Baghdad dropped by half from 298 to around 91 by the end of 2007. By late summer 2007, local ceasefires between coalition forces and Sunni insurgents led to significant security and political changes across western and central Iraq. However, the complex environment created by insurgent groups and tribal factions led to a war within a war, complicating the operational landscape. Neither Petraeus nor General Raymond Odierno believed that handing over control to Iraqi forces would bring stability as long as the Iraqi government and security forces remained complicit in sectarian violence. The coalition's emphasis on Iraqi control and Iraqi army leadership weakened, with reducing violence emerging as the new primary measure of success. So how was success achieved according to the new success criteria set in 2007? What had changed on the ground? Let's briefly review these. Then we'll continue with the process where everything started to go wrong again. The operational tempo and effectiveness of US forces in Iraq saw a significant increase due to the reinforcement of support units and major shifts in US combat tactics. However, this success was not solely dependent on the addition of 21,000 combat troops and 8,000 support personnel. The coalition's growing strength in security operations enabled large-scale stabilization efforts that helped quell Iraq's sectarian civil war. In 2007-2008, there was an extraordinary level of civil-military cooperation, with a shift in focus from strategic to tactical levels. The development and maturation of technological innovations greatly enhanced the ability of coalition and Iraqi forces to engage enemy groups more closely and survive encounters with IEDs. The coalition's intelligence capabilities also improved, with thousands of intelligence experts actively supporting counterinsurgency and stabilization operations. Additionally, coalition units gained unprecedented access to advanced intelligence resources at lower levels, providing US troops with a significant advantage during local operations. The concept of money as a weapon became deeply embedded in coalition operations at every level, contributing to the spread of the awakening movement and disrupting the insurgency's funding. During this period, US Secretary of Defense Gates placed great emphasis on countering the threat posed by IEDs, which were responsible for the majority of coalition casualties. By the end of 2006, despite 3 years of efforts, the US military was still facing an average of 1,200 IED attacks per week, with nearly 50 incidents occurring daily. Due to their simplicity, ease of material acquisition, and high effectiveness, IEDs became a frequently used weapon by insurgent groups. In 2003, CENTCOM Commander General John Abizaid declared IEDs the #1 threat, and in 2006, President Bush identified defeating the IED threat as a top priority. From 2005 to 2008, IEDs were responsible for more than half of all US personnel deaths in Iraq. With an optimistic outlook, the unit was established in 2003 with just 12 members to combat IEDs, and by 2007, it had transformed into an organization with 100 personnel and an annual budget exceeding $4 billion. Significant developments also occurred in the area of armored vehicles. In 2007, 60% of U.S. casualties were due to IEDs, but by the end of 2008, after the deployment of 10,000 MRAPs, that figure had dropped to just 5%. In the context of population control, the introduction of biometric scanning capabilities at the tactical level for units was of significant importance. Given the ease with which identification documents could be forged, population censuses faced the challenge of being susceptible to infiltration attempts by political parties aiming to create majority influence. This issue was particularly critical due to its impact on the distribution of oil revenues, making it a high-priority concern. To address this, portable and simple biometric identification scanning devices were developed for soldiers to use easily on the streets. As a result, the gradual collection of fingerprints and eye scans facilitated the creation of a personal identity database. Additionally, the coalition gained the ability to match fingerprints found on IEDs with collected biometric data. As the security situation improved, General Petraeus emphasized that money could be used as ammunition, highlighting its importance as a key facilitator for field commanders. These funds, initially sourced from assets seized from the Saddam regime and later approved by Congress through the Department of Defense budget, were utilized at the brigade task force commander level in Iraq. The funds were used for a wide range of purposes, from spending $25 to replace a window to $33 million for constructing a hotel, offices, and a shopping center at the Iraq airport. In the spring of 2007, the increase in the number of U.S. brigade combat teams and the revival of security operations in the Baghdad region led to a sharp rise in the number of captured insurgents, exacerbating overcrowding in MNFI detention facilities. As the prisoner count grew, Task Force 134 struggled to maintain control over these facilities, leading to a repeat of the insurgency and escape attempts seen earlier in 2005. To address this issue, there were calls for the construction of new detention centers and an increase in staffing. However, these requests were only partially met. Marine Corps Major General Douglas Stone, responsible for the detainees, sought to reform what he viewed as jihad universities. His initial step was to expand camp capacities to facilitate the segregation of detainees and, through approved releases and vocational training programs, to reintegrate detainees into their local communities, tribes, and families. He also proposed establishing reconciliation centers to provide vocational and civilian training to recently released detainees and unemployed Iraqi men, along with a small stipend and ongoing support for ex-prisoners. By 2007, the judicial system established in 2003 had failed to address the increasing number of detainees and could no longer manage even routine legal and criminal cases. To ensure the safety of judges and prosecutors, MNFI established a rule of law green zone in the Rusafa district of eastern Baghdad, which included a courthouse, detention facility, training academy, and housing for judges and their families. Trials were conducted in these zones, achieving some progress. As a result, the green zones successfully protected Iraq's judiciary and judges from physical threats, but could not shield Iraqi courts from political influence. However, the effects of the unlawful actions that took place in Abu Ghraib still continue. Operationally, the surge strategy achieved most of its objectives by the summer of 2008. Particularly in central, southern, and western Iraq, life began to return to normal for many. However, the summer's events revealed that achieving political goals would be more challenging. The ongoing ethnic and sectarian conflicts in Diyala disappointed U.S. commanders who were hopeful of defeating al-Qaeda in Iraq. Despite efforts to contain al-Qaeda in Iraq in the country's remote corners, problems in Mosul persisted, and extremist attacks, though limited in the north, continued. As Petraeus prepared to leave Baghdad, it was left to his successor, General Odierno, to tackle these unresolved issues. The critical question became whether the US-led coalition could turn the challenging operational gains of the surge into a stable and secure Iraq. On September 16, 2008, General Raymond T. Odierno took over from General David H. Petraeus during a ceremony led by Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. Joint operations by coalition and Iraqi forces against the Mahdi army, or Jaish al-Mahdi, in Basra and Baghdad, along with operations targeting al-Qaeda in Iraq in Diyala and Mosul, significantly reduced violence in the country. By late 2008, much of the territory previously controlled by insurgents had come under Iraqi government control, and Sunni and Shia militant groups, once on the verge of toppling the Iraqi government in 2006, were retreating almost everywhere. Despite these positive developments, there were also concerning signals. The Iraqi government's inefficacy led to very slow progress in governance and economic development efforts. The withdrawal of al-Qaeda in Iraq to northern Iraq also created a potential Arab-Kurdish conflict between the Erbil and Baghdad administrations. As local elections approached in Iraq, the security agreement quickly became a divisive internal political issue. Severe disagreements among Iraq's major parties turned into ethnic and sectarian rifts. Shia parties, including Saddam and his allies, demanded the immediate expulsion of U.S. troops and organized numerous protests against the agreement. Consequently, while Maliki and the Supreme Islamic Iraqi Council secretly supported continued strategic relations with the U.S., Maliki avoided publicly endorsing the agreement due to public backlash. Many Sunni leaders expressed fears that the U.S. withdrawal would lead to a Shia-led campaign of violence against the Sunni population. The arrival of the Obama administration in January 2009 marked a dramatic shift in American policy and stance in Iraq. As a candidate, Senator Obama had advocated for the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq, and upon taking office, he swiftly began to implement this plan. Obama stated that the combat mission should end within 19 months, and that U.S. combat troops could not remain in Iraq beyond this period. However, he also mentioned the possibility of maintaining an unspecified number of forces for military assistance after the end of the combat mission. By the end of summer 2009, there was a noticeable increase in attacks by al-Qaeda in Iraq. On August 19, 2009, two simultaneous truck bombings near the Iraqi Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs resulted in 75 deaths and 749 injuries, an event dubbed Bloody Wednesday. In the following days, on October 25th, bombings near the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Public Works caused over 800 casualties. Similar attacks on December 8th targeted the Ministry of Finance, a key judicial facility, and a busy overpass, killing 50 Iraqis and injuring over 200. Al-Qaeda in Iraq claimed responsibility for these attacks. In late 2009, pressure was mounting for the withdrawal of American troops. The primary reason was that, after the 2008 financial crisis, U.S. government officials and American foreign policy experts began to argue that counterinsurgency was too costly during a period of shrinking resources. Although full stability had not been achieved in Iraq, the priority had shifted to complete withdrawal. As U.S. troops prepared to leave Iraq, signs emerged indicating the resurgence of key adversarial groups. Under new leadership, and with the onset of the Syrian civil war, al-Qaeda in Iraq reorganized throughout 2011 and eventually morphed into what would be known as ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Meanwhile, Shia militant groups aiming to gain prestige and credibility similar to Hezbollah's position after Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000 increased their attacks against U.S. forces in mid-2011. Iran-backed militias also conducted these attacks to better position themselves for political power in the post-U.S. era. The new Iraqi state had begun to show signs of unraveling in the face of these threats. Prime Minister Maliki's politicization of the Iraqi security forces and the establishment of units like the Iraqi Special Operations Forces made it difficult for the U.S. to fulfill its security assistance missions. This created a sovereignty trap, where the host government's goals conflicted with U.S. interests. Falling oil prices led to budget cuts for the ISF, making it impossible to implement plans such as forming new Iraqi Air Force units. The consequences of the U.S. withdrawal became clearer with time. In 2013, a series of political moves by Maliki that marginalized Iraq's Sunni community led the country toward a state of civil war. In early 2014, Fallujah fell to insurgents and later became an ISIS stronghold. By June 2014, ISIS captured Mosul, and 4 Iraqi army divisions in the Nineveh and Salah ad-Din provinces were destroyed. The ISIS warriors advanced into the outskirts of Baghdad and the city of Erbil, prompting Shia militia groups in Iraq to mobilize significantly to defend the capital. By the end of summer 2014, US forces began returning to Iraq to bolster the ISF and launch a new fight against ISIS, but they had to do so without the benefit of the military infrastructure they had closed in 2011. Consequently, it became evident that the war, which began in 2003, was far from over.